Hello everyone, my name is Emma Foxvogel from the Northwest Regional Field Office, and in this presentation I'll be going over the heart of the Dune area, Section D. Why is Section D the heart of Dune area, you may ask? Well, because this is the section that makes the Dune area survey different from all other NASS surveys, as we're surveying the land for missing farms. This section also helps determine how incomplete our list frame is for crop acreage, and it's also used to derive the objective yield survey sample for cotton, corn, and soybeans. So what is Section D for? Section D is designed to be a recording form for the tract acreage within the area land segments. It accounts for all the acres inside the blue tract boundaries, as shown on this example segment. We then use the tract acreage to set estimates of crops and land usage for the upcoming June acreage report. And for that reason, it's important to take a little extra time to review the parcel maps with the tract operators while you're interviewing them. This is to ensure that you have this section completely correct. Starting with the first question in Section D and the rest of the tract questionnaire, you will record acres to the nearest tenth of an acre or 1 decimal point. Most importantly to note for this section is to not include any land from outside of the red segment boundaries. We are only collecting data for the land inside the red segment boundaries. The rest of the tract questionnaire will account for the total acres operated by the tract operator, and that will be discussed at a later time. I encourage you to double check the tract acres in this section before you conclude the survey interview with the tract operator as well. Like in recent years, we no longer need to obtain field-level data, which simplifies the section tremendously for all involved. We still need to know what's inside the red segment boundaries, but we only need to obtain data at the tract level. You may see aerial photos from past years which do have field boundaries delineated. As a general rule, we do not need to update the field boundaries, but you should check with your regional field office regarding whether it's necessary to have those field boundaries removed from the photo. Okay, let's dive into the different parts of this section. Lines 2 to 5 remain the same for all state tract questionnaire versions. However, there are some key points to keep in mind for these 5 lines, such as on line 2, not all tracts will have a farmstead within the segment, and that's totally fine. Line 3 is waste. Waste includes windbreaks, roads, swamps, vacant homes, water areas, and all other waste types. Line 4 accounts for woodland, not pastured, and pastured. If you come across an operator that has woodland that is grazed or woodland with limited grazing potential, then list as woodland pastured. All other woodland should be listed as not pastured, such as CRP land planted in trees, abandoned fruit or nut orchards, and acres harvested for lumber or pulpwood. Also, keep in mind that woodland pastured or not pastured cannot be combined with pasture acres on line 5, regardless of acreage size. These are independent of each other. Line 5 accounts for pasture, such as permanent pasture, which is ground that is normally grazed by livestock and is not in a regular crop rotation. This is typically ground that has never been tilled. Then there's cropland pasture, which is cropland in a crop pasture rotation that's used only for pasture during the current year, but could be, and has been, used for crops without additional land improvements. As mentioned before, you cannot have pastured woodland recorded here. Lastly, note that the dashed line on line 5 is basically a cropland divider. Everything below the dashed line is considered cropland. Everything above is not cropland. Next, we have lines 6 and 7. What are you recording here? This is where you account for tracts with acres in summer fallow and idle cropland. Summer fallow includes land in crop rotation that is tilled or treated with chemicals to control vegetative growth during the growing season, but is not planted. Idle cropland is land that is not used for crops during the current year. CRP land is recorded here. The exception is CRP planted specifically to trees. This CRP is recorded in line 4, woodland not pastured, as I mentioned previously. Okay, now let's take a look at the grain questions. Please note that the line numbers and grain crops will vary by the state questionnaire version you are working on. But you will notice there's a pattern in the grain questionnaire, which is acres planted and to be planted for all purposes, acreage left to be planted, acreage harvested specifically for grain or seed, and other uses of the grain. Some examples of other grain uses would be corn that was planted then cut for silage, and wheat that was planted and abandoned. There are 2 additional points to consider for this portion of the section. The first is that for small grains, you will need to record acres planted last fall or this spring, even if the crop was abandoned prior to harvest. The second is if any of the reported grain acres are to be harvested for hay, then record this acreage under the small grain hay line. The line number for small grain hay will be different for each state questionnaire version. Moving on to the non-grain crops. Here again, line numbers and crops will vary by the state questionnaire version you are working on. The non-grain crop portion of Section D includes crops such as soybeans, cotton, potatoes, sunflower, dry beans, dry peas, and hay. The main key points for this portion of Section D include there is an additional line for double cropped acres of soybeans, and this will appear on the 3rd line next to soybeans. For hay acres with more than 1 cutting, the acreage is only reported once. And hay that is chopped for silage, sometimes known as haylage, green chop, or baleage, should be recorded in other crops. Here is an example of the table to list any additional crops that are not already accounted for in this section. Please be specific as to what the other crop or crops are in this table. You have up to 5 lines to list other crops. If you need more than 5 lines to record all of the additional crops in a specific tract, then list them under this table, but make sure the total other crop acres are accounted for in item code 848 box.
All right, I'm back for another practice exercise, and this time we will cover Section D. Now let's take a look at exercise number 2. How should you record the other crops that do not have a specific box in Section D? Is it A, leave them off since they don't have a specific box? B, complete the other crops line and fill in code 848. C, fill out the other crops box with each individual crop that was not already recorded above. Or D, both B and C. And feel free to pause the video until you come up with an answer. The correct answer is D, both B and C. When you have other crops, you'll need to make sure and write each one out at the bottom of the page and the other crops box for each crop and the number of acres. Once you have all the crops accounted for, you will add them up and put those acres in box 848 for other crops.
Now it's time to review and add up the acreage listed in this section. Double check that it equals the total in item code 840, subtracting out any double cropped acres. If it differs from the figure in the box, then check with the respondent for errors and correct as necessary. Did they include all waste acres? Did you or the respondent miss a crop? Did you misrecord acres for a crop? Check the decimal points to make sure they're correctly recorded and added up. The last 2 questions of Section D are cropland with irrigation potential. This includes all cropland acres with irrigation equipment even if not used for this year. Only select states will ask this irrigation question. Double cropped acres. This question reminds the farm operator to consider all uses of the tract this year. The acres we're after here are double cropped acres, which refer to 2 crops harvested from the same field during the same crop year. This definition is different from what we have used in the past, and you will receive further guidance for this question. When it comes to double cropped acres, some common occurrences may include soybeans planted following a small grain crop, hay fields where both dry hay and haylage are cut from the same fields, and vegetable crops where an early season crop is followed by a late season crop, or even a second planting of the same vegetable. Lastly, we have the office use. This is item code 7793. This code was added to monitor the source of the data recorded in section D. This code is completed by you, the enumerator, since tract questionnaires will be submitted via CAPI. Please include notes in CAPI regarding your observations of the tract as well. It's very important to understand that section D needs to be completed regardless of the outcome of your interview. Even if the operator refuses the survey or is inaccessible, you will still need to draw the tract boundaries on the aerial photos and complete section D to the best of your ability. Recording the correct crop and land use not only impacts crop estimates, but it also affects objective yield sampling later on. So use all the resources we've provided you. Use your grid to determine the tract acres. Use any resource material offered to you. And use your field observation notes to complete the section, as you're the only person who's visiting the segment, so only you can tell us what is actually there. If you need assistance in making a determination, please reach out to your supervisor, master coordinator, and your survey project lead if needed. But before you submit your work, never hurts to look back on the basics, as listed here. As you review your tract assignments, consider these questions. Did I identify the correct tract operator? Did I verify tract boundaries with the operator? Did I draw off tract boundaries in blue? Did I assign each tract a letter? Did I account for all land in the segment? Is each operating arrangement listed as a separate tract? Okay, now is the time to look at a few examples of how to complete section D. I'll be using the Idaho State questionnaire version for the tract examples. Let's pretend you've drawn off the tract boundaries for tracts A, B, C, and D. You completed section D, and now it's time to review your work. All right, so here's an example for tract A. Please keep in mind I'm using the Idaho State questionnaire version for these examples. Tract A operator told you that she has 60 acres in the segment boundaries. She has these divided in 30 acres of oat hay, 30 acres of corn for silage, and she also mentioned that all crops are irrigated. Note that the acres harvested for oat hay must be accounted for under line 23, small grain hay, in this state questionnaire version. The small grain hay line will be different for your state. In addition, the corn is for silage, which should be recorded in the other use of corn planted item code 789 box. And finally, you need to account for the 60 acres that were reported as having irrigation available, since the operator indicated that all the crops were irrigated. Next, we have the example for tract B. Tract B operator indicated that she initially planted 40 acres of spring wheat, all for grain. However, she ended up cutting 10 acres for silage, which is used to feed her goats. This leaves 30 acres to be harvested for grain, and she indicated that these are all dryland acres, which means there's no irrigation. For tract C, the operator you spoke to indicated they have 28 acres total within the red boundaries of the segment. These 28 acres include 3 acres for their farmstead, 14.5 acres of woodland that's not pastured, and 10.5 acres of permanent pasture for their horses. This tract is pretty easy and straightforward. In the final example, the operator in tract D told you that he has 30 acres of orchard, of which 10 acres are apples, 10 acres are cherries, and 10 acres are hazelnuts, also known as filberts. These are all irrigated acres, which you accounted for in item code 803. You also made sure that the total acres listed in the other crops table are all accounted for in item code 848 above the table. As you may know, what-ifs are guaranteed, and it would be impossible to cover all the what-if scenarios that could occur in this section. However, if you come across a situation and you're just not sure how to address it, then you should consult the interviewer's manual and other survey resources provided to you by your regional office. Talk to your supervisor and reach out to your master coordinator. And lastly, contact your regional office. This concludes our review of Section D, the Heart of June area. Thank you for your attention.